Hi, I'm Zoe. I was released early from surgery. When I arrived home, I discovered my mother and her boyfriend going through my personal belongings, throwing away every trophy, every certificate, every piece of evidence that I had ever accomplished anything. They were erasing me from my own life. 3 years later, I walked into the biggest advertising agency in Portland as their new creative director, and my first meeting was with my mother's company. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Growing up in the Sunset District of Portland, I always knew I was different from my family. While my older brother Kyle was busy perfecting his jump shot and collecting basketball scholarships, I was holed up in my bedroom with colored pencils and sketch pads, creating worlds that didn't exist anywhere else. My mother, Patricia, worked as a receptionist at a small insurance firm downtown, and she made it clear from early on that creativity was a luxury our family couldn't afford. "Art doesn't pay bills, Zoe," she would say whenever she caught me drawing instead of doing homework. "You need something practical. Something steady." But practical felt like a prison to me. Numbers and formulas made my brain feel foggy, while colors and shapes made everything sharp and clear. Kyle understood the family hierarchy perfectly. He was the golden child, the one who would get a basketball scholarship and maybe even make it to the pros. Every dinner conversation revolved around his latest game, his stats, his future. When college scouts started showing up to his games during his junior year, my mother would spend entire evenings on the phone with relatives, bragging about her son, the athlete. I learned early to keep my victories small and quiet. When I won the district art competition in 8th grade, I didn't even mention it at home. The certificate went straight into my desk drawer, hidden under old school assignments. When my design for the school yearbook cover was chosen over 50 other submissions, I told no one. These moments belonged to me alone, and somehow that felt safer than risking their indifference. My art teacher, Mrs. Garrison, was the first adult who ever looked at my work and saw potential instead of impracticality. She was a thin woman in her 50s, with paint permanently stained under her fingernails and an infectious enthusiasm for creativity. During my sophomore year, she started staying after school to work with me on portfolio pieces. "You have something special here, Zoe," she would say, pointing to a particular brushstroke or color choice. "This isn't just talent. This is vision." Those words felt like water after wandering in a desert. For the first time, someone was telling me that being different might actually be valuable. Mrs. Garrison introduced me to graphic design software during my junior year, and everything clicked into place. The combination of artistic vision and digital precision felt like coming home. I spent every free period in the computer lab, teaching myself Photoshop and Illustrator, watching tutorials until my eyes burned. While Kyle was at basketball practice, I was creating logos for imaginary companies and designing posters for events that existed only in my imagination. The tension at home grew thicker as I got older. Kyle's basketball success continued to soar, and my mother's boyfriend Marcus moved in during my senior year. Marcus was a loud man who worked construction and had strong opinions about everything, especially about what teenage girls should and shouldn't be doing with their time. "What's she gonna do with all that computer stuff?" he would ask my mother over dinner, nodding in my direction like I wasn't sitting right there. "She needs to learn to do something useful. Maybe she could work at your office, answer phones or something." My mother would nod along, never defending my interests or acknowledging that I might have different strengths than phone answering. The few times I tried to show them something I had created, their responses were politely dismissive at best. "That's nice, honey," my mother would say without really looking. "Very colorful." During my senior year, Mrs. Garrison pulled me aside after class one October afternoon. "Zoe, I've been thinking about your future," she said, closing the classroom door behind us. "Have you considered applying to art school?" The question hit me like a physical force. Art school felt as impossible as becoming an astronaut or a movie star. "My family would never support that," I said quietly. "They think art is a waste of time." Mrs. Garrison sat on the edge of her desk, studying my face carefully. "What if I told you there were scholarships available? Full rides for students with exceptional portfolios?" The idea was terrifying and thrilling at the same time. For weeks, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I would lie in bed at night, imagining what it would feel like to spend 4 years surrounded by other people who understood that creativity wasn't frivolous, but essential. People who looked at a blank canvas and saw infinite possibility instead of wasted space. Mrs. Garrison helped me research programs, and we settled on the Portland Institute of Creative Arts, a prestigious school known for launching successful careers in advertising and design. The application required a portfolio of 20 pieces, an essay about my artistic vision, and letters of recommendation. The deadline was February 1st, just 4 months away. I threw myself into the work, with an intensity that surprised even me. Every spare moment was spent refining pieces, creating new work, perfecting compositions until they felt exactly right. I converted a corner of my bedroom into a makeshift studio, hanging my work on the walls to see how pieces worked together as a collection. Kyle noticed the change first. "What's all this stuff?" he asked one evening, poking his head into my room and looking around at the artwork covering my walls. For a moment, I considered telling him the truth. Kyle and I had never been particularly close, but he wasn't cruel like our mother could be. "Just working on some projects for art class," I said, turning back to my computer, where I was fine-tuning a digital painting. He lingered in the doorway for a moment, and I thought maybe he was going to say something encouraging. Instead, he shrugged and walked away. My mother's reaction was more pointed. She started making comments about the electricity bill going up from all my computer use, and wondered aloud why I was spending so much time alone in my room instead of looking for a part-time job like other kids my age. Marcus was more direct. "She's becoming antisocial," he told my mother one evening when they thought I couldn't hear them talking in the kitchen. "Spending all that time on her little art projects instead of learning real skills. You need to put a stop to it." I started being more careful about when I worked, waiting until they were watching television or asleep to pull out my art supplies. The secrecy felt familiar, like returning to my childhood habit of hiding my accomplishments. But this time, the stakes felt higher. This wasn't just about avoiding their disapproval. This was about my entire future. In December, I finally submitted my application. Mrs. Garrison helped me print and package everything, and we drove to the post office together to send it off with tracking confirmation. Holding that envelope felt like holding my whole life in my hands. Everything I had worked for, everything I hoped to become, was condensed into those 20 pieces of art and 3 pages of writing about why I deserved a chance. "Whatever happens, you should be proud of this work," Mrs. Garrison said as we watched the postal worker scan the package and hand me a receipt. "This portfolio represents real growth and genuine talent." The waiting period was agony. Every day felt like a month, and I found myself checking the mail obsessively, even though I knew it was too early for responses. I tried to focus on my regular schoolwork, but everything felt pointless compared to that one envelope that would determine whether my dreams were realistic or just childish fantasy. In January, Kyle signed his letter of intent to play basketball at Oregon State University on a full scholarship. The celebration at our house was unlike anything I had ever witnessed. My mother cried happy tears, Marcus bought champagne, and relatives I hadn't seen in years called to congratulate Kyle on his achievement. The local newspaper even ran a small article about him, which my mother laminated and hung on the refrigerator. Watching Kyle's triumph made my own secret application feel even more risky. What if I didn't get accepted? What if my mother was right that art was impractical, and I was setting myself up for disappointment? What if I had wasted months of work on something that would never lead anywhere? February arrived with unusually warm weather for Portland, and with it came the thick envelope I had been dreaming about since October. I saw it in our mailbox when I got home from school, my name written in official university letterhead across the front. My hands were shaking as I carried it inside, along with the rest of the family's mail. The house was empty. Kyle was at basketball practice, and my mother was still at work. Marcus wouldn't be home for another hour. I sat at our kitchen table, staring at the envelope, afraid to open it. What if it was a rejection? What if all those months of work and hope had been for nothing? I finally tore open the envelope and pulled out the letter, my eyes scanning quickly for the word that would determine everything. Congratulations. I had been accepted with a full scholarship based on the strength of my portfolio and academic record. 4 years of tuition, room, and board, completely paid for. I read the letter 3 times before the reality sank in. Someone believed in my work enough to invest in my future. Someone saw the same potential that Mrs. Garrison had been talking about for years. I wasn't delusional or impractical. I was talented, and now I had proof. The front door opened, and I heard my mother's familiar footsteps in the hallway. This was my moment to share the most important news of my life with the person who should be proudest of me. I folded the letter carefully and took a deep breath, preparing to bridge the gap that had existed between us for so many years. "Mom!" I called out as she hung up her coat in the front closet. "I have something incredible to tell you." My mother walked into the kitchen with the same tired expression she wore every evening after work. Her purse hit the counter with a soft thud, and she began sorting through the mail I had left beside the acceptance letter. I watched her face carefully, holding my breath as I prepared to share the news that would change everything. "Mom, I got accepted to the Portland Institute of Creative Arts," I said, trying to keep the excitement from making my voice too high. "With a full scholarship. Everything paid for." She stopped sorting the mail and looked at me with a blank expression that slowly shifted into something I couldn't quite read. Not happiness, not pride, but something closer to confusion mixed with irritation.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
"You applied to art school?" Her voice was flat, almost accusatory. "When? Why didn't you tell me?" I held out the letter, my hands trembling slightly. I wanted it to be a surprise. I've been working on my portfolio for months. Mrs. Garrison helped me, and they loved my work enough to offer a full scholarship. Can you believe it? My mother took the letter, but didn't unfold it. She just held it between two fingers, like it was contaminated with something unpleasant. "Zoe, this is ridiculous. You can't just make these kinds of decisions without discussing them with your family first." The excitement that had been building in my chest for hours began to deflate. This wasn't the reaction I had imagined during all those nights of working on portfolio pieces. I had pictured tears of joy, phone calls to relatives, maybe even the same kind of celebration Kyle had received when his scholarship news arrived. "But Mom, it's a full ride," I said, my voice getting smaller. "It won't cost you anything. This is my chance to actually make something of myself." "Make something of yourself doing what, exactly?" She set the letter down on the counter without opening it. "Drawing pictures? Playing around on computers? That's not a career, Zoe. That's a hobby." The front door slammed, and I heard Marcus's heavy footsteps in the hallway. He appeared in the kitchen doorway, still wearing his construction boots and safety vest, looking irritated about something that had happened at work. "What's all the commotion about?" he asked, opening the refrigerator and pulling out a beer. My mother handed him the letter without a word. Marcus scanned it quickly, then looked at me with the same expression he might use if I had announced I was joining the circus. "Art school?" He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Jesus, Patricia, where did you go wrong with this one? First she spends all her time locked in her room with those silly drawings. Now she thinks she can make a living at it." "I didn't raise her to be impractical," my mother said, as if I wasn't standing right there listening to them discuss my future like I was a problem to be solved. "Kyle has his head on straight. He's going to get a real education that leads to a real career." "This is a real education," I said, my voice louder than I intended. "The Portland Institute has one of the best advertising programs in the country. People who graduate from there work at major agencies, design companies, tech firms. It's not just drawing pictures." Marcus took a long drink of his beer and shook his head. "Listen to yourself. You're 17 years old, and you think you know how the world works. Those artsy jobs go to people with connections, people whose families have money. You think some girl from Sunset District is going to waltz into some fancy advertising agency?" "Why not?" I asked, and I could hear the desperation creeping into my voice. "Why can't I be the one who makes it? Someone has to get those jobs. Why not me?" "Because you're living in a fantasy?" my mother said, her tone sharper now. "Because real life isn't some movie where the poor girl with big dreams gets discovered and becomes famous. Real life is showing up to work every day, paying bills, being responsible." Kyle walked through the front door at that moment, gym bag slung over his shoulder and hair still damp from post-practice showers. He could sense the tension immediately and looked around at all of us standing in the kitchen. "What's going on?" he asked, setting his bag down carefully. My mother showed him the letter, and I watched his face as he read it. For just a moment, I thought I saw something that might have been pride or at least surprise, but when he looked up, his expression had shifted to match the rest of the family. "Zoe, this is pretty cool," he said, and my heart lifted for just a second before he continued. "But Mom's right. You need to think practically. Maybe you could do art as a side thing, while you study something more stable." The betrayal from Kyle hit harder than my mother's dismissal or Marcus's mockery. Kyle was supposed to understand what it felt like to have a dream, to work toward something that felt bigger than yourself. He had spent years pursuing basketball with single-minded determination, and our whole family had supported him. Now he was telling me to treat my passion as a hobby. "So what am I supposed to do?" I asked, looking around at all three of them. "Just give up on the one thing I'm actually good at?" "You're good at lots of things," my mother said in the tone she used when she was trying to be patient but failing. "You get decent grades in math. You could study accounting or business. Something that guarantees a job when you graduate." "I hate math," I said quietly. "It makes me feel dead inside." "Welcome to adulthood," Marcus said with another laugh. "Nobody loves their job. You do it because you have to, because you have responsibilities." I looked at the acceptance letter sitting on the counter, the seal of the Portland Institute visible through the thin paper. 3 months ago, receiving this letter had felt like the most important thing that could ever happen to me. Now it felt like evidence of my own foolishness. "I'm not going to support this," my mother said firmly. "If you want to throw away your future chasing some ridiculous dream, you'll have to do it without my blessing." "But I don't need your financial support," I said. "The scholarship covers everything. I just need you to sign the enrollment forms because I'm not 18 yet." The silence that followed was different from the argumentative tension that had been building. This silence felt final, like a door closing. My mother looked at Marcus, and some kind of communication passed between them that I wasn't part of. "We're not signing anything," she said. "And I'm not letting you fill out paperwork behind my back like some kind of criminal. If you want to be treated like an adult, start acting like one." "Acting like an adult means pursuing my dreams," I said, but even as the words came out, I could hear how young I sounded. "No," Marcus said, crushing his empty beer can with one hand. "Acting like an adult means giving up childish fantasies and accepting reality. Your reality is that you're a high school girl from a working-class family, and you need to plan accordingly." Over the next few days, the atmosphere in our house became toxic. My mother wouldn't speak to me directly, communicating only through Kyle when absolutely necessary. Marcus made pointed comments about teenagers who thought they were too good for honest work. The acceptance letter disappeared from the kitchen counter, and when I asked about it, my mother said she had thrown it away. "You won't be needing it," she said without looking up from her crossword puzzle. I called Mrs. Garrison from the school phone during lunch, trying to keep my voice steady as I explained what had happened at home. She listened without interrupting, occasionally making small sounds of sympathy or understanding. "Zoe, I'm so sorry," she said when I finished. "I know how much this meant to you, and I know how hard you worked for it." "Is there anything I can do?" I asked. "Some way to accept without my mother's signature? I'll be 18 in 4 months. The enrollment deadline is March 15th. Mrs. Garrison said gently. "Your birthday isn't until June. I'm afraid without parental consent, there's no way to defer the scholarship or hold your spot." That night, I lay in my bed staring at the artwork covering my walls. Pieces I had spent months perfecting now looked like evidence of my own naivete. Maybe my family was right. Maybe I had been living in a fantasy, thinking I could make a career out of something I loved. The next few weeks passed in a blur of resentment and resignation. I stopped working on new art projects and focused instead on my regular coursework, trying to figure out what I would do with my life if creativity wasn't an option. My grades in other subjects were decent but not exceptional. I had no particular talent for math or science, No burning interest in business or accounting. Kyle tried to bridge the gap a few times, suggesting that maybe I could study graphic design at a community college, or take a few art classes while pursuing a more practical degree. But his suggestions felt like consolation prizes, ways to placate me without actually supporting my ambitions. One evening in early March, I overheard my mother talking to her sister on the phone about Kyle's upcoming graduation and college plans. The pride in her voice was unmistakable as she described his basketball achievements and academic scholarship. "He's always been so focused," she said. "Even as a little boy, he knew what he wanted and went after it. I'm just grateful he didn't get distracted by unrealistic ideas like some kids do." The conversation continued, but I stopped listening. The message was clear. Kyle's dreams were legitimate because they aligned with what the family could understand and support. My dreams were distractions, unrealistic ideas that needed to be discouraged before they led me astray. That weekend, I made a decision that surprised even me. I cleaned all the artwork off my bedroom walls, rolled up my canvas pieces, and packed everything into boxes. If my family wanted me to be practical, I would be practical. I would give up on art school and find something more acceptable to pursue. On Monday morning, I told Mrs. Garrison that I wouldn't be accepting the scholarship to the Portland Institute. She looked genuinely shocked, her face falling as she processed what I was telling her. "Zoe, are you sure about this?" she asked. "This is a life-changing opportunity. These kinds of scholarships don't come around often." "My family doesn't support it?" I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. Maybe they're right. Maybe I should focus on something more realistic. Mrs. Garrison was quiet for a long moment, studying my face carefully. "What will you do instead?" The question hit me like a physical blow because I had no answer. I had been so focused on proving that I could be practical that I hadn't actually figured out what practical meant for me. "I'll figure something out," I said. "Maybe community college. Maybe I'll get a job and take classes part-time. That's not a plan, Zoe. That's giving up." Her words stayed with me through the rest of the day and into the evening. Was I giving up, or was I being realistic? Was there a difference? I had worked so hard for something that felt important, but maybe the fact that my own family couldn't see its value meant I was wrong about its importance. That night, Marcus knocked on my bedroom door. It was unusual for him to seek me out for conversation, so I was immediately suspicious about what he might want. "Your mom wanted me to talk to you," he said, standing awkwardly in my doorway. "She's worried you're still upset about the art school thing." "I'm not upset," I lied. "I understand why it wasn't practical." "Good," he said, but he didn't leave. Instead, he looked around my room, noticing the blank walls where my artwork used to hang. "Look, kid, I know you think we're being hard on you, but we're trying to protect you from getting your hopes up about something that probably won't work out." "I know," I said quietly. "Your mom and we've seen what happens when people chase unrealistic dreams. They end up disappointed and bitter, wishing they had made better choices when they were young." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak without crying. "There's nothing wrong with being average," he continued. "Most people are average, and they find ways to be happy. You don't have to be special to have a good life." After he left, I sat on my bed in the dark room, surrounded by boxes of artwork I might never look at again. Maybe he was right. Maybe being average was enough. Maybe I had been foolish to think I could be anything more than that. But deep in my chest, there was still a small flame that refused to go out. Even as I agreed with my family's practical concerns, even as I convinced myself that they were protecting me from disappointment, part of me couldn't accept that this was how my story was supposed to end. 3 weeks before my high school graduation, something happened that changed everything. I was walking home from my part-time job at a local coffee shop when I saw Mrs. Garrison's car parked outside our house. My stomach dropped as I realized she must be there to talk to my mother about my decision to decline the scholarship. I walked faster, hoping to get inside before any damage could be done. But as I approached our front porch, I could hear raised voices coming from inside. My mother's voice, sharp and defensive, and Mrs. Garrison's voice, passionate and frustrated. I let myself in quietly, and stood in the hallway where I could hear their conversation in the living room. "She is throwing away an incredible opportunity," Mrs. Garrison was saying. "Zoe has more natural talent than any student I've taught in 20 years. This scholarship is validation of that talent." "Talent doesn't pay bills," my mother replied. "And I won't have my daughter wasting 4 years on something that won't lead to steady employment." "Patricia, I understand your concerns, but you're making a mistake. The creative industries are huge employers. Advertising, marketing, web design, entertainment. These are growing fields with real opportunities. For people with connections," Marcus's voice joined the conversation, "for people who can afford to take risks. We can't." "Zoe wouldn't be taking a financial risk," Mrs. Garrison said. "Everything is paid for. This is a chance for her to get an education that could transform her entire life trajectory." "And what if it doesn't work out?" my mother asked. "What if she graduates and can't find a job? Then what? She'll be 4 years behind everyone else who chose practical careers." I couldn't listen anymore. I walked quietly upstairs to my room and closed the door, but I could still hear their voices rising and falling in heated discussion. After about 30 minutes, I heard the front door close and Mrs. Garrison's car driving away. My mother came upstairs a few minutes later and knocked on my door. When I opened it, her face was flushed and angry. "Your teacher came here trying to undermine our decision," she said. "I hope you didn't put her up to that." "I didn't," I said truthfully. "I told her I wasn't accepting the scholarship." "Good. Because I'm tired of everyone acting like we're the villains here. We're trying to help you make smart choices, and all we get is attitude and interference from people who don't understand our situation." That night at dinner, the conversation was stilted and uncomfortable. Kyle talked about his final basketball season and his excitement about starting at Oregon State in the fall. Marcus discussed a new construction project that might lead to steady work through the summer. My mother mentioned that her office might have an opening for a file clerk that I could apply for after graduation. "It's not glamorous," she said, "but it's steady work with benefits. You could take some business classes at night and work your way up." I nodded and tried to look enthusiastic about the prospect of filing insurance documents for the rest of my life, but inside I felt like something was dying. Not just my dreams of art school, but something more fundamental. My sense that life could be more than just showing up and getting by. After dinner, I went to my room and pulled out one of the boxes of artwork I had packed away. I opened it carefully, as if the pieces inside might crumble at my touch. The first thing I saw was a digital design I had created for Mrs. Garrison's class, a poster for an imaginary music festival. Looking at it now, I could see all its flaws, but I could also see the energy and creativity that had gone into every element. This wasn't just a hobby or a childish fantasy. This was work that came from somewhere deep inside me. Work that felt necessary in a way that filing insurance documents never would. But maybe necessity wasn't the right word to use when talking about dreams. Maybe my family was right that necessity was about survival, about paying bills and being responsible. I closed the box and pushed it back under my bed. In 2 weeks, I would graduate from high school. In 3 weeks, the enrollment deadline for the Portland Institute would pass, and my scholarship would go to someone else. Someone whose family believed in their potential, or someone brave enough to pursue their dreams without family support. As I lay in bed that night, I made a promise to myself. I would try to be the practical person my family wanted me to be. I would apply for the file clerk position and take business classes at night. I would stop thinking about color palettes and design principles and focus instead on learning skills that led to steady employment. But somewhere deep inside, I knew this promise was a lie. I knew that giving up on art wouldn't make me practical, it would just make me bitter. And bitterness, I was beginning to understand, was a much more dangerous thing than unrealistic dreams. The morning after graduation, I woke up in my childhood bedroom, feeling like I was drowning in slow motion. The diploma on my dresser felt meaningless, just a piece of paper marking the end of one chapter without offering any clear direction for the next. My mother had already left for work, and Marcus was gone to his construction site. Kyle had moved out 2 days earlier, heading to Oregon State for summer training. The house felt hollow and strange without his presence. I walked downstairs to find a note from my mother on the kitchen counter. She had set up an interview for me at her insurance office that afternoon. The file clerk position was still available, and her boss was willing to meet with me as a favor. At the bottom of the note, she had written, "This is your chance to start building a real future." I folded the note and put it in my pocket, then walked outside into the unusually warm June morning. The neighborhood looked exactly the same as it had when I was 7 years old, the same cracked sidewalks and faded paint on the houses. Nothing had changed except me, and even that change felt temporary, like I was just pretending to be someone who had given up on her dreams. The interview went exactly as I expected. Mr. Henderson, my mother's boss, was a kind man in his 60s, who clearly saw this as doing Patricia a favor rather than finding the best candidate for the job. He explained that I would be filing documents, answering phones, and occasionally helping with data entry. The salary was minimum wage with a small raise possible after 6 months of good performance. "It's not exciting work," he admitted, "but it's steady and there's room for advancement if you're willing to learn the business side of things." I nodded and smiled and told him I was very interested in learning about the insurance industry. The lies came easily, probably because I had been practicing them on myself for weeks. When he offered me the job, I shook his hand and thanked him for the opportunity, even though every word felt like swallowing glass. My first day of work was a Monday in late June. I wore one of my mother's old blazers and a pair of black pants I had bought at a thrift store. The office was small and dated, with beige carpeting and fluorescent lights that made everyone look slightly ill. My desk was in a corner near the copy machine, where I would spend most of my time organizing files and answering phones with the same scripted greeting. The work was mind-numbing. I spent hours sorting documents alphabetically, filing claims by date, and transferring information from handwritten forms into computer databases. By the end of my first week, I could do most of my tasks without thinking, which left my mind free to wander to all the things I was trying not to think about. During my lunch breaks, I would walk to a small park a few blocks away and sit on a bench, watching people pass by on their way to more interesting jobs. I started carrying a small sketch pad, telling myself it was just for idle doodling, nothing serious. But even these casual drawings felt like coming up for air after being underwater too long. One afternoon, I was sketching the old fountain in the center of the park when someone sat down on the other end of my bench. I looked up to see a woman about my mother's age, with silver hair pulled back in a messy bun and paint stains on her fingers. "You're very good at that," she said, nodding toward my sketch. "Do you study art somewhere?" The question hit me like a punch to the stomach. "No," I said quietly. "Just something I do for fun." She said, studying my drawing more carefully. "That's a shame. You have a real eye for composition and light." I'm Elena Vasquez. I teach at the community college downtown. I introduced myself and tried to close the sketchpad, but she asked if she could see more of my work. Against my better judgment, I flipped through a few pages of drawings I had made during my lunch breaks. Her expression grew more interested with each page. "Zoe, have you ever considered taking some art classes?" she asked. "Even just for personal enrichment? I teach an evening course in digital design that might interest you." "I can't afford college classes," I said, which was true but not the whole truth. The real truth was that I had promised myself to stop thinking about art as anything more than a hobby. "The community college has financial aid programs," Elena said, "and my evening classes are much less expensive than regular tuition. You could keep your day job and take one class at a time." She pulled a business card from her purse and handed it to me. "Think about it. Real talent shouldn't go to waste." That night, I sat in my bedroom staring at Elena's business card. Taking an art class felt like betraying the promise I had made to my family and to myself. But it also felt like the first interesting possibility I had encountered in months. I tucked the card into the same box where I kept my old artwork, telling myself I was just holding on to it, not actually planning to use it. The summer dragged by in a haze of filing and phone answering. I got my first raise in August, a whole 50 cents more per hour. which my mother celebrated as if I had been promoted to company president. Marcus seemed pleased that I was finally contributing to society, instead of wasting time on impractical pursuits. But the longer I worked at the insurance office, the more hollow I felt inside. I would catch myself staring out the window during slow afternoons, watching clouds move across the sky, and thinking about how I might capture that movement in a painting. Or I would notice the way light fell across someone's face in the waiting area and automatically start composing a portrait in my head. One evening in September, I was walking home from work when I passed the community college campus. Almost without thinking, I turned toward the art building and found myself looking through the windows at students working on projects. I could see Elena through one of the classroom windows, demonstrating something on a computer screen while students gathered around her. The next day, during my lunch break, I called the community college's financial aid office. The woman I spoke with explained that I could qualify for partial aid based on my family's income, and that taking one evening class would only cost about $300 for the semester. It was money I could save from my paychecks if I was careful about expenses. I didn't tell my family about the phone call, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. $300 felt like a huge amount of money, but it also felt like the price of keeping part of myself alive. I started eating lunch at my desk instead of going out, and I walked to work instead of taking the bus, slowly accumulating the money I would need for tuition. By October, I had saved enough for the class, but I still couldn't bring myself to register. Every time I picked up the phone to call the admissions office, I would hear my mother's voice telling me that art was impractical, or Marcus's voice saying that I needed to accept reality. I would hang up before dialing and go back to filing insurance claims. The decision was made for me on a Thursday afternoon in late October. I was organizing a particularly tedious stack of accident reports when I overheard my coworker Janet talking to another employee about her daughter. "She's been taking photography classes at the community college," Janet was saying. "Nothing serious, just something fun to do in the evenings. But she's gotten so good at it that she's started doing wedding photography on weekends. She's making more from her hobby than I make in my regular job." The conversation continued, but I stopped listening. Someone was making money from photography, which my family would probably consider just as impractical as graphic design. But more importantly, someone was pursuing something they loved and finding a way to make it work financially. Maybe the choice between practical and impractical wasn't as black and white as my family had made it seem. That evening, I called the community college and registered for Elena's digital design class. The woman on the phone told me that classes started the following Monday, and that I would need to purchase some basic supplies from the campus bookstore. I gave her my credit card number and committed to spending $300 on something my family would see as a waste of money. When I hung up the phone, my hands were shaking. I had just made the first real decision about my own life in months, and it felt terrifying and exhilarating at the same time. I didn't tell my family about the class. Instead, I told them I was working late on Mondays and Wednesdays, which wasn't entirely a lie since the classes ran from 7 to 9 in the evening. I would leave work at my regular time, grab dinner from a fast food restaurant, and drive to the community college campus feeling like I was sneaking away to live a secret life. Elena's classroom was everything I had missed without realizing it. The walls were covered with student work from previous semesters, and the computers were loaded with professional design software. The other students ranged in age from 18 to 60, and they all seemed to share the same hunger for creative expression that I had been suppressing for months. On the first night, Elena had us introduce ourselves and explain why we were taking the class. Most people gave practical reasons. They wanted to design marketing materials for their small businesses, or they needed digital skills for their jobs, or they were looking to change careers. When it was my turn, I found myself being more honest than I had planned. "I used to want to be a graphic designer," I said quietly, "but I got scared and took a safe job instead. I guess I'm here because I miss creating things." Elena smiled at me from across the room. "Well, you're in the right place to start creating again." The first few weeks of class were like remembering how to breathe properly. We learned basic principles of design and color theory, concepts I had taught myself years ago but had forgotten in the months of focusing on practical concerns. Elena pushed us to think conceptually about our work, to consider not just what looked good but what communicated effectively. My first assignment was to design a logo for an imaginary business. I chose a coffee shop partly because I was familiar with the industry from my part-time job in high school. I spent hours working on different concepts, trying to balance creativity with the kind of clean professionalism that would work in the real world. When Elena returned our assignments the following week, mine had detailed feedback written in her careful handwriting. She had circled elements that worked well and suggested improvements for areas that could be stronger. At the bottom, she had written, "This shows real commercial potential. Have you considered freelance work?" The comment stayed with me through the rest of the week. I had been thinking of the class as a way to keep my artistic interests alive, but Elena was suggesting that my work might actually have value in the marketplace. It was a possibility I hadn't allowed myself to consider since giving up my scholarship to art school. During our next class, Elena announced that she would be bringing in a guest speaker the following week. David Kim was a freelance graphic designer who had built a successful business working with small companies and nonprofit organizations. He would talk about the practical side of making a living as a designer. "I know some of you are here for personal enrichment," Elena said, looking directly at me. "But for those who are interested in the business applications of these skills, David will have some valuable insights." I spent the entire week looking forward to David's presentation. I had questions about how someone actually made the transition from having design skills to having design clients, but I wasn't sure I was brave enough to ask them in front of the class. David turned out to be a man in his early 30s who dressed casually but spoke with the confidence of someone who had figured out how to make creativity profitable. He showed us examples of his work, ranging from business cards and brochures to website designs and social media campaigns. "The thing about freelance design," he said, "is that you don't need a fancy degree or expensive equipment to get started. You need skills, which you're learning here, and you need clients, which you can find if you're willing to start small and build your reputation gradually." He talked about how he had started by designing materials for friends, businesses, then using those projects to build a portfolio that attracted paying clients. Within 2 years of starting his freelance work, he was making enough money to quit his day job at a marketing firm. During the question and answer period, I finally found the courage to raise my hand. "How do you know when your work is good enough to charge money for it?" I asked. David smiled. "That's the wrong question," he said. "The right question is, how do you get good enough by doing paid work? You learn by doing, and you get better with every project. The key is to start before you feel ready, because you'll never feel completely ready." After class, I lingered in the parking lot, thinking about what David had said. Elena walked out to her car at the same time and noticed me standing there. "Zoe, how are you feeling about the class so far?" she asked. "I love it," I said honestly. "It's the best part of my week." "You're doing excellent work," she said. "Some of the best I've seen from a student at this level. Have you given any thought to what David said about freelancing?" I hesitated, then decided to be honest with her. "I want to, but I'm scared. My family thinks art is impractical. And I have a steady job that pays my bills. Taking a risk feels selfish." Elena leaned against her car and studied my face in the parking lot lighting. "Zoe, can I tell you something? I've been teaching for 15 years, and I've seen a lot of talented students. Most of them fall into 2 categories. Those who are technically skilled but don't have much to say, and those who have vision but struggle with execution. You're in a 3rd category. You have both technical ability and something meaningful to communicate through your work." Her words hit me harder than I expected. But what if I'm not good enough? What if I try to freelance and fail? "What if you don't try and spend the rest of your life wondering what might have been?" she asked gently. "Right now you're failing at something you've never attempted. Wouldn't you rather find out what you're actually capable of?" That night, I sat in my bedroom with my laptop open, looking at websites of freelance designers. I studied their portfolios, their pricing, their client testimonials. Most of them didn't seem dramatically more talented than I was becoming, but they had something I lacked: the courage to call themselves professionals. I started thinking about businesses in Portland that might need design work. The coffee shop where I used to work had always used handmade signs and photocopied flyers. The insurance office where I currently worked had a logo that looked like it had been designed in 1987. Even small businesses needed marketing materials, and someone had to create them. Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into my class assignments with new intensity. If I was going to attempt freelance work eventually, I needed a portfolio that would convince potential clients to trust me with their projects. Elena noticed the change in my work and started giving me more challenging assignments, pushing me to develop a distinctive style and voice. One evening, she asked me to stay after class. "Zoe, I have a proposition for you," she said as the other students filed out. "I do some consulting work for local nonprofits, helping them with their marketing materials. I have more work than I can handle right now, and I was wondering if you'd be interested in collaborating on a project." My heart started beating faster. "You mean like actual paid work?" "Exactly like actual paid work," she said. "The Portland Women's Shelter needs a new brochure and some signage. It's not a huge budget, but it would be a good first project for your portfolio, and you'd be working on something that makes a real difference in the community." I said yes before she finished explaining the details. That night, I drove home feeling like I was vibrating with possibility. I had actual design work to do, work that someone was willing to pay for. It felt like the first step toward becoming the person I had always wanted to be, despite everything that had happened to convince me it wasn't possible. I still didn't tell my family about the class or the freelance project. They continued to see me as their practical daughter who had chosen steady employment over unrealistic dreams. But every Monday and Wednesday evening, I was secretly rebuilding the part of myself I had almost lost. I was learning that giving up on dreams didn't make them disappear. It just made them go underground, where they waited for the right moment to resurface stronger than before. By the time winter arrived, my secret life had become more real to me than my official one. I was completing my second semester of Elena's classes while maintaining 3 regular freelance clients. The work wasn't glamorous, mostly small business logos and basic marketing materials, but each project taught me something new about balancing creative vision with commercial practicality. My portfolio was growing, and so was my confidence. I had created a professional website showcasing my work and started using social media to connect with other designers and potential clients. During my lunch breaks at the insurance office, I would scroll through design blogs and industry publications, absorbing trends and techniques that made my evening work stronger. The contrast between my two worlds was becoming harder to manage. During the day, I filed claims and answered phones with the mechanical efficiency of someone who had done the same tasks hundreds of times. But in the evenings, I was solving creative problems, experimenting with typography and color schemes, feeling my brain light up in ways that 8 hours of insurance work never accomplished. Elena had become not just my instructor but a mentor who pushed me toward bigger opportunities. When she learned that I was consistently booking freelance projects, she suggested I start thinking about transitioning away from my day job. "You're ready for more challenging work," she told me after reviewing my latest project, a complete brand identity for a local bakery. "But you'll never be able to take on bigger clients while you're committed to full-time office work. Those projects require meetings during business hours, multiple revisions, the kind of attention you can't give while you're filing insurance paperwork." The suggestion terrified and thrilled me in equal measure. I had been treating freelance work as supplemental income, a way to keep my creative interests alive while maintaining financial stability. Elena was suggesting I flip that relationship, making design my primary focus and finding another way to cover my basic expenses. "I can't just quit my job," I protested. "What if the freelance work dries up? What if I'm not as good as I think I am?" "What if you are better than you think you are?" Elena replied. "What if the only thing holding you back is your own fear?" Her words echoed in my mind for days. I started doing calculations, figuring out exactly how much freelance income I would need to match my insurance office salary. The number wasn't impossible, but it would require booking more clients and charging higher rates than I had been comfortable with. I was still wrestling with the decision when something happened that forced my hand. It was a Tuesday morning in February, and I was organizing files when my coworker Janet called me over to her desk. "Zoe, you're good with computers, right?" she asked. "Mr. Henderson wants to update our marketing materials, maybe create a website. Do you know anyone who does that kind of work?" My heart started racing. The insurance office needed design work, the kind of project I had been doing for other businesses for months, but they didn't know about my skills because I had never told them about my evening classes or freelance work. I might know someone, I said carefully. What kind of budget is he thinking about? Janet pulled out a folder with notes from her meeting with Mr. Henderson. They wanted a new logo, business cards, brochures, and a basic website. The budget they had allocated was more than I typically charged for similar projects, partly because they didn't know enough about design pricing to negotiate aggressively. Your friend should contact Mr. Henderson directly, Janet said. He wants to get this done quickly, so he's willing to pay extra for fast turnaround. I nodded and took down the contact information, my mind spinning with the implications. This was a chance to do significant work for my current employer, but it would require revealing my secret skills and potentially changing how they saw me. If I did good work, it might open doors to more opportunities. If I failed, it could jeopardize my steady job. That evening, I called Elena and explained the situation. She listened without interrupting, then laughed when I finished. Zoe, this is perfect, she said. You know the business better than any outside designer would. You understand their brand, their customers, their industry. And if they're happy with your work, Mr. Henderson will be your best reference for landing other insurance and financial services clients. But what if they think it's weird that I didn't tell them about my design skills? Then you tell them the truth. You've been developing these skills in your spare time, and you're ready to take on professional projects. Most employers would be thrilled to discover that someone on their team has valuable additional capabilities. The next morning, I spent my entire lunch break composing an email to Mr. Henderson. I explained that I had been taking design classes and building a freelance portfolio, and that I was interested in bidding on their marketing project. I attached samples of my work and a detailed proposal outlining what I could deliver and when. I sent the email before I could change my mind, then spent the rest of the afternoon trying to focus on filing claims while imagining every possible response from my boss. He could be excited about my hidden talents, or confused about why I hadn't mentioned them before, or suspicious that I had been distracted from my regular work. Mr. Henderson called me into his office an hour before closing time. I had never been in his private office for anything other than my initial interview, and I felt like a child being summoned to the principal's office. Zoe, I have to say I was surprised to get your email, he said, gesturing for me to sit in the chair across from his desk. I had no idea you were doing this kind of work. I've been taking classes in the evenings, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I didn't want to let it interfere with my work here, so I kept it separate. He opened a folder containing printed copies of the design samples I had sent him. I watched his face as he looked through them, trying to read his expression. He lingered on the bakery branding project, studying the logo and business card designs. This is professional quality work, he said finally. How long have you been doing this? About 8 months, I said. I started with one class, then kept taking more as I got better at it. Mr. Henderson leaned back in his chair, still looking at my portfolio samples. I have to admit, when Janet told me you knew someone who did design work, I was expecting you to recommend a friend or something. I never imagined you were talking about yourself. I understand if you prefer to work with an outside designer, I said quickly. I just thought I should let you know I was available if you were interested. Actually, I think this could work out very well, he said. You understand our business better than an outsider would, and your rates are competitive. My only concern is how this would affect your regular duties here. We spent the next 20 minutes working out the logistics. Mr. Henderson was willing to let me adjust my schedule to accommodate client meetings and project deadlines, as long as I continued to handle my regular filing and administrative duties. He also suggested that if the marketing project went well, there might be opportunities for me to take on design work for some of his business associates. I have friends who own small businesses, he said. They're always complaining about how expensive marketing services are. If you can do quality work at reasonable prices, I'd be happy to refer clients to you. I left his office feeling like I was floating. Not only had I landed the biggest project of my freelance career, but I had gained a potential source of referrals and a more flexible work schedule. Most importantly, I no longer had to maintain the exhausting pretense that I was just a file clerk with no other interests or abilities. The insurance office project took 3 weeks to complete and became the cornerstone of my evolving portfolio. Mr. Henderson was thrilled with the results and immediately started recommending my services to other business owners. Within a month, I had enough work to justify reducing my office hours to part-time, which gave me mornings to meet with clients and work on projects. Elena was delighted with my progress but pushed me to think even bigger. "You're ready for agency-level work," she told me during one of our regular check-ins. "The projects you're doing now are good for building experience, but you need to start targeting larger clients if you want to make a real living at this." She suggested I start reaching out to marketing agencies and advertising firms, not as a job applicant but as a freelance contractor who could handle overflow work. Many agencies used freelancers for specific projects, and the rates were significantly higher than what small businesses typically paid. "I don't know if I'm ready for that level of work," I said. "Agency clients probably have much higher expectations." "The only way to find out is to try," Elena replied. "And the worst thing that happens is they say no. You're already succeeding at a level most people never reach." Her confidence in my abilities was both reassuring and intimidating. I had gotten comfortable with my current level of success, working with small businesses that appreciated my efforts and weren't overly demanding about revisions or timelines. Agency work would mean competing with designers who had formal degrees and years of professional experience. But Elena was right that I had reached a plateau with my current approach. If I wanted to turn design into a career that could actually support me long-term, I needed to start charging higher rates and working with more sophisticated clients. I spent several weeks researching Portland advertising agencies, studying their websites, and trying to identify which ones might be most open to working with freelancers. I put together a new portfolio specifically targeted at agency work, emphasizing projects that demonstrated strategic thinking rather than just visual appeal. The first agency I contacted was Morrison Creative, a mid-sized firm that specialized in healthcare and nonprofit clients. I sent them a carefully crafted email explaining my background and offering my services for project overflow or specialized assignments. The response came back within 2 hours. David Morrison, the agency's creative director, wanted to meet with me the following week to discuss potential collaboration. He mentioned that they were particularly busy with a major rebranding project and could use additional design support. I spent the weekend preparing for the meeting, researching Morrison Creative's recent work, and practicing how I would present my portfolio and experience. This felt different from pitching small business owners who were grateful for any professional help. Agency people would evaluate my work against much higher standards. The Morrison Creative office was everything I had imagined an advertising agency should be. Open floor plans, exposed brick walls, employees dressed in stylishly casual clothes that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. I felt intimidated walking through the lobby, but also excited to be in an environment where creativity was the primary business focus. David Morrison was a man in his early 40s, with the kind of effortless style that suggested he had never worried about whether his clothes were practical or appropriate for his job. He looked through my portfolio quickly but thoroughly, asking questions about my process and experience. "This is solid work," he said, closing the portfolio and leaning back in his chair. "Elena Vasquez spoke very highly of you when I called her for a reference. She says you're one of the most naturally gifted students she's ever taught." "Elena has been an incredible mentor," I said, surprised that she had already spoken to him about me. "We have a client launching a new wellness center," David continued. "They need a complete visual identity, marketing materials, signage, web presence. It's exactly the kind of project that showcases what a designer can do when they're thinking strategically about brand development." He outlined the project scope and timeline, then mentioned the budget. It was more money than I had ever been paid for a single project, enough to cover my living expenses for 3 months if I was careful about spending. "I'll be honest with you, Zoe," David said as our meeting concluded. "We typically work with freelancers who have agency experience or formal design education. But your portfolio shows real commercial instincts, and Elena's recommendation carries a lot of weight with me. I'm willing to give you a chance if you think you can handle the pressure." I told him I was definitely interested and would send him a detailed project proposal by the end of the week. As I walked back to my car, I felt like I was crossing an invisible threshold between amateur and professional, between someone who did design work and someone who was actually a designer. That evening, I called my mother to tell her I would be reducing my hours at the insurance office to pursue freelance work. I had been dreading this conversation for weeks, knowing she would see it as a return to the impractical dreams she thought I had abandoned. Freelance what? She asked when I explained that I was taking on design clients. Graphic design, I said. Marketing materials, logos, websites. I've been taking classes and building a client base for almost a year now. The silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had been disconnected. Finally, my mother spoke. Zoe, we've been through this before. You can't make a living doing art projects. You have a steady job with benefits and opportunities for advancement. I know it seems risky, I said, but I'm already making almost as much from freelance work as I do at the office, and I just landed a project with a real advertising agency. An advertising agency? The skepticism in her voice was unmistakable. What kind of advertising agency would hire someone with no experience? They're not hiring me as an employee, I explained. I'm working as a freelance contractor on specific projects. It's actually a common way that agencies work with designers. My mother sighed heavily. Zoe, I thought you had learned your lesson about chasing unrealistic dreams. You're throwing away job security for something that might not work out. But what if it does work out? I asked. What if this is actually what I'm supposed to be doing with my life? And what if it isn't? She replied. What if you quit your real job and then discover that freelance work isn't as reliable as you think? Then what? The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, but neither of us changed our position. My mother saw my freelance success as a lucky streak that would inevitably end, leaving me worse off than when I started. I saw it as evidence that I had been right all along about my potential as a designer. When I hung up the phone, I felt the familiar weight of family disapproval settling over my excitement about the Morrison creative project. But this time, the feeling was different. Instead of making me doubt my choices, my mother's skepticism made me more determined to prove that I could succeed on my own terms. I had spent too many years believing that other people were better qualified to judge my potential than I was. But I was the one doing the work, building relationships with clients, solving creative problems that mattered to real businesses. My success wasn't theoretical anymore. It was measurable, repeatable, and growing stronger with every completed project. The next morning, I walked into the insurance office and gave Mr. Henderson my 2 weeks' notice. I would finish my current projects and help train my replacement, but then I was done with filing claims and answering phones. I was ready to find out what I could accomplish when I stopped playing it safe and started trusting my own abilities. 3 years after leaving the insurance office, I was running my own creative agency from a converted warehouse space in Southeast Portland. What had started as freelance work had evolved into Hartwell Creative, a boutique firm specializing in brand development for healthcare and nonprofit organizations. I employed 2 junior designers and a project coordinator, and our client roster included some of the most respected organizations in the Pacific Northwest. The success still felt surreal sometimes. I would walk through our office space, past the conference room where I met with clients and the design stations where my team worked on campaigns, and remember filing insurance claims in a beige cubicle. The contrast was so stark that it felt like remembering someone else's life. Elena had become one of my closest advisors, serving on the informal board of mentors who helped me navigate the business side of running an agency. She often reminded me that my story was proof that talent and determination could overcome almost any obstacle, including family opposition and self-doubt. You've built something remarkable, she told me during one of our monthly coffee meetings. Not just a successful business, but a life that reflects your actual values and capabilities. But success had come with unexpected complications. As my agency grew and attracted attention in Portland's creative community, I found it increasingly difficult to maintain the emotional distance from my family that had protected me during my early freelance years. They knew I was doing well financially, but they seemed to view my achievements as a fortunate accident, rather than the result of strategic decisions and hard work. Kyle had graduated from Oregon State and was working as a physical trainer at a local gym while trying to figure out his next career move. He occasionally made comments about how I had gotten lucky with my art business, as if persistence and skill development had nothing to do with my success. My mother had softened her position slightly, acknowledging that my design work was apparently more viable than she had initially thought. But she still seemed skeptical that it would last long-term, often making comments about the importance of having backup plans and keeping my business expenses low in case I needed to return to traditional employment. Marcus remained the most dismissive, frequently making jokes about how I drew pictures for a living and wondering aloud when I would start doing something more substantial with my education and abilities. His comments stung less than they used to, partly because I had developed confidence in my own judgment, but also because I had surrounded myself with people who understood and respected creative work. One afternoon in late spring, I was reviewing portfolio presentations from recent design school graduates when my assistant knocked on my office door. "Zoe, there's someone here to see you," she said. "She doesn't have an appointment, but she says she's your mother." I looked up from the resumes spread across my desk, confused. My mother had never visited my office, despite my repeated invitations to stop by and see what I had built. Our relationship had settled into a pattern of polite distance, with occasional phone calls and obligatory holiday visits, but she had never shown interest in my professional life beyond asking general questions about how business was going. "Should I tell her you're busy?" my assistant asked, clearly picking up on my surprise. "No, send her back," I said, quickly gathering the resumes into a neat stack. "And maybe bring some coffee if she wants it." A few minutes later, my mother appeared in my office doorway, looking around with the expression of someone trying to reconcile what they were seeing with what they had expected. She took in the framed awards on my walls, the creative briefs pinned to my project boards, the expensive computer equipment that was essential for professional design work. "This is quite a setup," she said, settling into the chair across from my desk. "Much more professional than I imagined." "Thanks," I said, unsure whether that was intended as a compliment or just an observation. "What brings you downtown?" My mother shifted in her chair, clearly uncomfortable with whatever had motivated her visit. She looked out my office window toward the design floor where my employees were working, then back at me. "Marcus and I broke up," she said abruptly. "Last week. It's been a long time coming, but I finally realized I couldn't keep living with someone who made me feel small all the time." I sat back in my chair, trying to process this unexpected news. Marcus had been a constant presence in our house for almost 6 years, and despite my personal feelings about him, I had assumed he was a permanent fixture in my mother's life. "I'm sorry," I said, though I wasn't entirely sure that was the appropriate response. "Are you okay? Do you need somewhere to stay?" "I'm fine," she said quickly. "I kept the house." Marcus moved in with a friend from work. She paused, looking down at her hands. "But ending things with him made me realize some things I should have figured out earlier." "What kind of things?" My mother was quiet for a long moment, still looking out the window at my team working. "Do you remember that night when Elena came to the house? Your art teacher before you graduated?" I nodded, surprised she was bringing up something that had happened so long ago. "She told me you had more talent than any student she'd taught in 20 years, my mother continued. "She said you could have a real career in design if I supported your education instead of fighting it." "I remember," I said quietly. "I told her she was wrong. I told her that art was impractical and that you needed to focus on something more realistic." My mother finally looked directly at me. "But she wasn't wrong, was she? You did exactly what she said you could do." The admission hung in the air between us. I had waited years to hear my mother acknowledge that my career path had been legitimate from the beginning, but now that it was happening, I wasn't sure how to respond. "I was scared," she continued. "Scared that you would struggle financially, scared that you would blame me if things didn't work out. But mostly I was scared that you were braver than I had ever been and that you might actually succeed at something I never had the courage to attempt." "You were just trying to protect me," I said, though the words felt inadequate for the complexity of what had happened between us. "No, I was trying to protect myself," my mother replied. "From having to watch you take risks I was too afraid to take. From having to admit that playing it safe isn't always the right choice." She told me about her own abandoned dreams, things I had never known about her younger self. She had wanted to be a photographer when she was in high school, had even applied to art programs at several colleges. But her parents had convinced her that photography was a hobby, not a career, and she had chosen business school instead. I spent 20 years filing insurance paperwork and telling myself I had made the practical choice, she said. Watching you pursue your dreams reminded me of everything I had given up, and I couldn't handle that reminder. We talked for over an hour, addressing years of misunderstandings and missed connections. My mother apologized for not supporting my ambitions when I was younger, and I apologized for shutting her out of my success once I had achieved it. It wasn't a magical reconciliation that erased all the hurt feelings, but it was a beginning. As she was getting ready to leave, my mother paused in the doorway of my office. Marcus used to say that your success was just luck, that anyone could start a business if they got the right breaks. But looking at this place, seeing what you've built, I can see that it took much more than luck. It took believing in myself when other people didn't, I said. That was the hardest part. A few weeks after my mother's visit, I received an invitation that would test every lesson I had learned about confidence and professional credibility. The Portland Business Journal was hosting their annual 40 Under 40 awards ceremony, recognizing young entrepreneurs and business leaders who had made significant contributions to the local economy. I had been nominated in the Creative Services category. The nomination itself was an honor, but what made the invitation particularly meaningful was the list of other nominees. These were people who ran tech startups, managed major nonprofit organizations, and headed divisions of Fortune 500 companies. They had MBA degrees from prestigious universities and years of corporate experience. I was a high school graduate who had learned design skills at community college and built my business through freelance work and referrals. Elena insisted I attend the ceremony, arguing that I deserved recognition for what I had accomplished, and that my story could inspire other people who were afraid to pursue non-traditional career paths. You represent something important, she told me. Proof that talent and determination can be more valuable than credentials and connections. Don't hide from that responsibility. The ceremony was held at the Portland Art Museum, which felt appropriately symbolic given my journey from rejected art student to successful creative entrepreneur. I wore a dress I had bought specifically for the occasion, something professional but distinctive enough to reflect my personal style and the creative nature of my work. As I walked through the reception area, I recognized several faces from business magazines and newspaper articles. These were people I had read about, whose companies I had studied when I was first learning how to run my own agency. Being in the same room with them as an equal felt like crossing another invisible threshold. During the cocktail hour, I found myself in conversations about market trends, client development strategies, and the challenges of scaling creative businesses. I realized that I belonged in these discussions, that my experience and insights were as valuable as anyone else's in the room. When they announced the winners in each category, I was genuinely surprised to hear my name called for creative services. As I walked to the stage to accept the award, I thought about the path that had brought me there. The rejection from my family, the months of sleeping in my car, the evening classes where I had slowly rebuilt my confidence and skills. In my brief acceptance speech, I talked about the importance of supporting young people who chose unconventional career paths and the value of creative skills in building a diverse local economy. I thanked Elena for believing in my potential when I didn't believe in it myself, and I acknowledged the clients who had trusted me with their projects when I was still proving myself. After the ceremony, as I was talking with other award recipients and business leaders, someone tapped me on the shoulder. I turned to see Kyle, dressed in a suit I had never seen before, looking both proud and slightly out of place in the formal museum setting. "Hey, sis," he said, giving me a hug. "Congratulations. This is pretty incredible." I was touched that he had come to the ceremony, especially since I hadn't mentioned it to my family. "How did you know about this?" "Mom saw the article in the Business Journal," he said. "She called and told me I should be here to support you." We found a quiet corner where we could talk without being interrupted by other reception attendees. Kyle told me that ending her relationship with Marcus had changed my mother's perspective on many things, including her regrets about how she had handled my artistic ambitions. "She's been reading about your company online," he said. "Looking at your website, the articles about projects you've done. I think she's finally starting to understand what you actually do for a living." "And what about you?" I asked. "Do you understand what I do?" Kyle smiled. "Honestly, not entirely. But I understand that you're really good at it, and that you built something from nothing using skills most people don't have." That's pretty amazing, regardless of the specific industry. We talked about his own career uncertainty, how completing his degree in exercise science hadn't led to the clear path forward he had expected. He was considering going back to school, maybe pursuing physical therapy or sports medicine, fields that would require several more years of education and training. It's weird, he said. I always thought having a concrete plan was the key to success. But watching what you've accomplished by following your instincts and adapting as you went, I'm wondering if I've been thinking about career development all wrong. As the reception wound down, I looked around the museum at the artwork displayed on the walls and the successful business leaders discussing their industries and achievements. 3 years ago, I had been filing insurance claims and telling myself that creative work was an impractical dream. Tonight, I was being recognized as one of Portland's most promising young entrepreneurs. The transformation hadn't happened overnight, and it hadn't been easy. It had required developing skills, building relationships, taking calculated risks, and maintaining confidence in my own judgment even when people I loved were telling me I was making mistakes. But perhaps most importantly, it had required learning to separate my sense of self-worth from other people's approval. My family's initial rejection of my dreams had been devastating, but it had also forced me to develop an internal source of validation that was more reliable than external recognition. As I drove home from the ceremony, I thought about the young people who might be in similar situations, torn between pursuing their passions and meeting their families' expectations for practical career choices. I wanted them to know that both paths involved risk, but that the risk of never trying was often greater than the risk of failure. The next morning, I woke up early and went for a walk through my neighborhood, still processing everything that had happened over the past few weeks. The reconciliation with my mother, the business recognition, Kyle's acknowledgement of what I had accomplished. It felt like pieces of my life were finally aligning in a way they never had before. When I got to my office, I found a handwritten note that had been slipped under the door. It was from Elena, congratulating me on the award and thanking me for proving that her faith in my potential had been justified. "You have become exactly who I always knew you could be," she had written. "But more importantly, you have become who you needed to be for yourself." As I settled into my office chair and looked out at the design floor where my team was beginning their workday, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this moment. I had started as a rejected art student sleeping in my car, convinced that I was a failure who would never amount to anything significant. Now I was running a successful creative agency, employing other designers, contributing to my community's economic development, and being recognized as a leader in my industry. But the external achievements, while meaningful, weren't the most important part of the transformation. The most important thing was that I had learned to trust my own judgment, to value my own dreams, and to persist in pursuing them even when the people closest to me couldn't see their worth. I had discovered that other people's limitations didn't have to become my limitations, and that family disapproval didn't have to define my possibilities. That afternoon, I was scheduled to have minor surgery to remove a cyst from my wrist that had been bothering me for months. It was a simple outpatient procedure that would only require local anesthesia, but my doctor had advised me to take the rest of the day off to rest and avoid using my hand for several hours. I left the medical center around 2 in the afternoon, planning to go home and spend the evening reading or watching movies. But as I drove through my old neighborhood, I found myself taking a detour past the house where I had grown up. I pulled into the driveway, surprised to see my mother's car parked outside and the front door standing open. I could hear voices inside, including one I didn't recognize. Curious, I walked to the front door and knocked. "Zoe?" My mother appeared in the doorway, looking surprised but pleased to see me. "What are you doing here?" I explained about the surgery and how I was on my way home when I decided to stop by. She invited me in, explaining that she was meeting with a realtor about possibly putting the house on the market. "I'm thinking about downsizing," she said as we walked toward the kitchen. "This place is too big for just me, and I'd like to try living somewhere new." In the living room, I could see a woman in a business suit taking photographs of the space and making notes on a tablet. The realtor looked up as we passed and smiled politely. "This is my daughter Zoe," my mother said. "She runs a creative agency downtown." The pride in my mother's voice was unmistakable, and it hit me more powerfully than I had expected. For years, I had craved that kind of acknowledgement from her, the simple recognition that my work was valuable and that my success was worth celebrating. "Oh, how wonderful," the realtor replied. "What kind of creative work do you do?" As my mother and I took turns explaining my business and recent recognition, I realized that something fundamental had shifted in our relationship. She was no longer apologizing for my career choice or treating it as a temporary phase one would eventually outgrow. She was genuinely proud of what I had built and wanted to share that pride with other people. After the realtor left, my mother and I sat in the kitchen, where we had so many difficult conversations when I was younger. The room looked exactly the same, but everything felt different. "I've been thinking about what I want to do next," she told me. "Now that Marcus is gone and I'm approaching retirement age, I have some freedom to make choices based on what I actually want instead of what seems safest." She told me she had been researching photography classes and considering whether she might try to develop some of the artistic interests she had abandoned decades ago. It wouldn't be a career change at her age, but it could be a way to reconnect with parts of herself she had suppressed for practical reasons. "Do you think it's too late for me to explore creative work?" she asked. "It's never too late to explore what makes you feel alive," I replied. "And if anyone tries to tell you it's impractical, you can point to your daughter's business as evidence that creative skills have real value." We both laughed, acknowledging the irony of how our positions had shifted over the years. As I prepared to leave, my mother walked me to the door and paused with her hand on the doorknob. "I'm proud of you, Zoe," she said simply. "Not just for the business success, but for having the courage to keep pursuing your dreams even when I didn't support them. You were right. And I was wrong, and I'm glad you didn't let my fears stop you from becoming who you were meant to be." Driving home that evening, I thought about the circular nature of the day's events. I had started the morning being honored for my professional achievements, spent the afternoon having a minor medical procedure, and ended by having the most honest conversation with my mother that we had shared in years. All of it felt connected somehow, different aspects of the same ongoing process of becoming fully myself. The recognition from my professional peers validated the choices I had made about my career. The surgery reminded me that life was fragile, and that postponing dreams was always risky. And the conversation with my mother completed a circle that had begun when I first started pursuing art against her wishes. I was no longer the rejected daughter sleeping in her car and wondering if she would ever amount to anything. But I was also no longer angry at the people who had doubted my potential, because I understood now that their doubts had been about their own limitations, not mine. The next morning, I returned to my office, refreshed and ready to tackle the projects and challenges that awaited me. I had built something meaningful from nothing, creating not just a successful business, but a life that reflected my authentic values and capabilities. As I looked around at the space I had created, filled with people doing work they loved and clients who valued their contributions, I realized that this was what victory looked like. Not perfect, not without ongoing challenges, but real and sustainable and deeply satisfying. I had proved that the family failure could become the family's success story, but more importantly, I had proved it to myself. And in the end, that was the only validation that really mattered. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.